you don't need to know about the other people on the ship. So actually, the amount of updating that happens there is actually the setup of like space and how like Star Citizen is actually better for that kind of stuff than, for instance, say Battlefield, where you're all sort of on the ground in first person. So I'm hoping that like you can fit more players. An instance when you've got like a multi-crew ship doesn't count as much against the player cap, if that makes any sense. So we'll have
that makes perfect sense. I work in IT, so all that's great. I have a lot of questions about the server that I'm sure you couldn't answer yet anyways.
And we're still in that, and also Jason Spangler, who's our CTO, he's basically the prime architect of the back-end stuff. I mean, his background was, he was one of the senior programmers on Ultima Online, right, when they first built it, and at the end ended up being the technical director of Origin and all the UO stuff, and then went and did it for the Dark Age of Camelot guys, and then was on the Old Republic at BioWare in Austin. So he's got a huge amount of like big sort of MMO experience, and we've talked through. There's a system that I sort of fleshed out in a big picture design while I was doing the prototype, and that's essentially the system we're implementing. But there's a lot of details that go into the big picture implementation that he's an expert on, and I'm not really an expert on. All the kind of stuff that I'm more focused on, like, does it look cool and does it blow up? That's how you deal with redundancy in data packets.
Well, it's much more fun to picture the blowing up than the redundancy portion. For multiplayer ships, if you have a gunner that, say, gets injured or even dies on your ship, is there any way you could have like a person who maybe is trained or just has medical supplies to either revive or heal that person, or are they just going to die in the same sense that we've already heard in Death of a Spaceman, where they're just going to come back on their planet? Or do you have any idea if that's going to work that way?
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, I think, what you're really talking about is like if you're in close, like, on shipboarding actions and someone gets hit, and can you help them out or patch them up or drag them out? So I mean, I think there'll be a certain amount of that. I mean, you already have, we're running in CryEngine, and right now we basically got everything Crysis 3's got. So all that first-person stuff's already sitting in our code base, all the weapons, all the attachments. So that side of stuff is actually pretty easy to implement. So the big questions are, what extra stuff are we going to do for, say, zero-G stuff? What are we going to do if there's like a decompression? And then if you want to add extra stuff like, fixing someone up with a Medipack or pulling them out or whatever. So I will say that the combat's probably going to be sort of more tactical, and it's not going to be like a straight ahead, just blast a whole bunch of people, because essentially if you're boarding a ship, it's not like you're going in and you're going to blast 50 or 60 people. It's going to be like maybe
running down a narrow corridor and getting lit up by a ton of people at the other end.
It's going to be like three against three or 4 against 4 or something. So that's tactical. So I think it would be more along the lines of something like a DayZ, where it's more it's more realistic in terms of you can't just take 1 million bullets and still like sit around the corner and let the red like fade away from your screen and then you're back to normal.
We're not doing slow-mo breaching sequences?
Are players going to be able to like I know there's not a leveling system or any kind of an RPG aspect, but if a player has a way to repair their ship on the outside, or whether that's from the inside, is that all just going to be skill based on the player, like a timing mechanic, press spacebar now, hit R now, and then that'll do the repair? Or is it going to be some other kind of fashion where you have a toolbox and you sit there and you hold a button and it just does the repair for you?
That's a good question. I mean, basically, we are going to do like EVA stuff, and you are going to be able to repair stuff. I'm not necessarily sure that we're going to have any particular level. Like all of a sudden, I'm now a level 3 repairer dude, because that's against the principle of this. It's not. I don't really want any sort of leveling of the characters. It's more about what you do and how you equip the stuff. So I think the repairs are going to be mostly about, do you have the right equipment? If you exited the ship and you're repairing it, it will take some time to repair or fix it. And of course, if you're fixing a ship and someone else shows up when you're outside your ship, it's probably not great. Kind of the idea is that, like maybe you take some damage and you need to go outside and just patch a few things so you can limp home and then get it fixed properly when you land on the planet.
That sounds like a good thing to do. On players, do you have any idea how long they're going to last? Because one thing you were mentioning, DayZ, if we run onto their website right now, they'll have an average player life of, I think it's around 20 minutes right now or less, and they're dead.
And with us, it's not. I mean, that's the whole that death of a spaceman idea. Is like the idea is you actually, in like, you basically essentially die multiple times. It's like lives, and then after you've expended all those, that's when you really die. So it's sort of you're close to death and you get revived or whatever. So it's not going to be like DayZ where bam, it's done and you got to start a new character because not only do you pass along your possessions to your next of kin, but you have multiple times where you basically can come back. And the other thing is if you're like in a fight and you lose the fight and you eject and you're in space, as long as someone doesn't shoot you, which is a pretty bad crime, basically shoot you floating hopelessly in space, you haven't lost a life. So you basically will just get recovered and you'll start back on your planet. So that doesn't really count against it. So I'm thinking that as long as you're not terrible and as long as people you're in an area of space where there's no law and people just basically kill every pilot that ejects because they like to do that, your character should last you quite a long time. I mean, there may be people that keep the same character for a couple of years if they don't get into too much combat or manage to eject and not get killed. So I kind of want some attachment you have to your character and it lasts some time, and then when you finally bite the bucket and you go to the funeral, it like has some emotional impact on you.
Yeah, that would be a lot of fun. Get you really invested in it. It's always good.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the idea of the immersion. The idea is sort of like there is a sense of progression in time. So that's the whole idea of the constant updating of the universe, because if we weren't constantly updating it, you wouldn't get a sense of time moving on. Like if you did a big yearly drop or something like sometimes some of the other big MMOs do, you wouldn't, like everything would just feel in stasis and then you update it once and then maybe things have just changed. Whereas with us, our idea is like the same way on the website that we have all these posts every week. The idea is we'll be updating content on a hopefully a weekly basis. If not, it would be at least a bi-monthly basis. And it doesn't mean that we're doing massive updates every time, but we're like 1 week we could be adding a new system, another week we're adding a new ship, another week we could be adding a new mission series that would be sort of like a scripted mission series that perhaps you can get some a cool item for. And we're also constantly updating like the internal sort of news or stories, and we'll be fashioning some of our content and missions around what we see happening in the world, what the players are doing. We'll also be reflecting it in like the gossip or the news articles and stuff. So the idea is that if things are happening, their actions in some way inform and affect the actual games and what the NPCs are doing too.
That's good. One of the questions I had, or my friend had about one of the ships, he was trying to think of